Good morning. My name is James. I'm a consultant. I work with the Eden Smith team with some of their clients, helping them think about things like talent strategy, utilization and retention. And I'm here today to talk about 10 things that we can do in a post-COVID-19 world to improve our talent strategy and workforce planning. Now, my starting position is this. In these fraught times, data remains of paramount importance to the growth and success of any company. The employment landscape has changed in the light of the COVID-19 pandemic, and it's fair to say that these changes are far from over. As of the last 24 hours, employees are being instructed to work from home again wherever it doesn't hurt businesses. Now, make of that what you will. Agility and understanding are now as more important as any other considerations with your workforce planning. Your talent strategy needs to be agile, proactively looking to create the most enticing and supportive environment for your data teams. And that's important, as I said, in terms of talent attraction, talent utilization, and talent retention. So what follows is a 10-point guide to adjustments to your workforce planning in a post-COVID-19 world. The first thing I want to talk about today is talent planning. There are a number of questions that all data teams and all companies with a data function should be asking themselves about how to bring on board and get the best from their data teams. So the first thing is, how are we managing any workforce reduction planning relative to our business continuity plans? Of the workforce that we have now, what skills gaps exist? And which do we need to address with urgency? Are there alternative types of labour, contractors, temporary staff, or even outsourcing, that we should be considering in our immediate workforce resizing efforts? What's our strategy for approaching the need for additional workforce reductions in the short and medium term? Do we anticipate further demands internally or externally for our services? Where do we continue to have critical skills gaps? And lastly, are the skills that we needed on site, or can they be accessed in an online or in a hybrid work environment? These are complicated questions, and this is why businesses like Eden Smith exist, to be able to work with you and explain a little about the candidate market to help you make some of those decisions. Now, the second thing I'd like to talk about is adapting to the disruption of the candidate market. A combination of furlough, redundancies, and a change in personal circumstances has massively disrupted the talent market in some ways, in some places. Where there were shortages before, sometimes you might find there are more candidates. However, competition has also grown more fierce for certain skills, particularly in a candidate-short market like data. One other thing to mention is that for people who are struggling to find work, there has been an increase, I think, in people applying to jobs for which they're not suitable, or perhaps trying to position themselves in a way that's not entirely accurate, relevant to their skills and experience. And again, this is why it's important to work with specialists who can help you navigate that minefield. Unease about the future can make it harder to prize the most highly skilled or experienced candidates out of secure roles. Therefore, you need to think about your talent acquisition strategy. Where can you lean on your internal teams and to field through hundreds of direct applications? Versus where should you invest in external support or even a search campaign via an exec headhunter like Eden Smith to increase your chances of making a great hire? The third thing that I'd like to talk about is pace. Moving through hiring processes swiftly has always been important, and it's now more important than ever. It used to be the case that whoever hired fastest hired first, and for a lot of businesses, particularly more established or global or corporate businesses, being slow to hire was one of the biggest challenges in trying to get great people through the door. But now that we're in a hybrid virtual world, virtual interviews mean no more travel time, which means interviews are easier to coordinate at shorter notice. You can have more stakeholders on a call as well, which means you can fly through your interview process quicker. However, a word of caution, make sure you decide and communicate clearly amongst your panel who is responsible for what. Identify your decision makers versus your influencers, and make sure you understand who is responsible for contributing what to the decision-making process and when a decision can finally be communicated. The next thing that I think we should talk about is rethinking onboarding. Now, whilst it's tempting to automate onboarding using pre-recorded webinars, Having interaction between new starters, teams and managers is essential in welcoming new people into a team, particularly when lots more time may be spent remotely or virtually. It's important to devise a structured onboarding program with one-to-ones and team meetings, but also personal time to review documents and information. Make sure your new starters aren't booked out 100% of the time, because you can guarantee that if they are, things are going to get missed. Stick to the timings that are communicated in an onboarding plan, but also allow for unknown unknowns, things like installing new software or potential Wi-Fi outages or just challenges from being at home with wives and kids and all that sort of stuff. And if your team are back in the office, recognise that your new employee may not have been in an office for 6 months. There may be some anxiety. It's so important that we're being mindful of our employees' well-being. The fifth thing that I'd like to touch upon is the importance of communicating culture. Lockdown has really given people time to reflect on what they want out of life. Candidates will likely know much better what sort of company they want to work for, and without doubt, the two biggest themes that have come out from an employee engagement perspective throughout this lockdown period have been work-life balance and mental health and well-being. Therefore, work with your HR and marketing teams to make sure you communicate clearly not just your standard benefits, pension, healthcare, that sort of stuff, but actually your working arrangements, your flexibility with hours, your approach to work from home, your support for a home office environment, and also what's available in the way of mental health and well-being support. If you're working with external suppliers, don't settle for less than excellence in service. Expect them to be able to pitch your culture and benefits to you clearly and concisely. After all, they're representing you externally. They should be the best salespeople working for you other than your own staff. The sixth thing I'd like to touch upon is the importance of focusing on your staff's development. Not every company is hiring. For some, impact of business has meant furloughing individuals and teams, or even worse, redundancies. The impact of these changes on an incumbent team mustn't be overlooked. There are a number of things that you, as a leader of people, can do to try to mitigate the impact of these challenges. So firstly, ensure a regular cadence for one-to-ones with your teams and stick to it. Start each session with an emotional check-in to gauge how people are feeling. I supported an executive team last year where the start of every one of our meetings each week, each person in the room would go around and use 3 words to express how they were feeling on that day. And that gave the other people in the room the opportunity to adjust their tone and adjust their approach if someone was not operating at what they felt was their peak. Lean on your HR teams for guidance and support for those available who are struggling, and make sure there's a safe space for people to communicate how they're feeling. Whilst lots of people celebrated the advantages and benefits of being based remotely for the last 3 to 6 months, there are some people who struggled. I was working with a software engineer only a few months ago who didn't have the space in his home to have anywhere where he could actually focus on the work he was trying to produce, and he found the whole period of lockdown incredibly stressful and very unproductive. Make sure that we're creating a safe space for those kind of conversations. And I think the last thing that's really important for us as leaders is to think about how we advocate good mental well-being practices, including taking time away from your screen if your team are remote, and a healthy work-life balance if they're back in the office. The 7th point that I'd like to touch on is the importance of driving performance. Now more than ever, it's essential though that we know why we're doing what we do. Companies are conscious of cost and return on investment, and therefore it's important that your team's output is directly linked to company goals and success measures. Making communicating goals a priority in one-to-ones and team meetings is a really good way to do this, but also reiterating expectations more frequently, ensuring identifiable and realistic metrics for success. Recognise great performances where you see them, whether that's in a one-to-one with an individual, sharing it via a team or company-wide email, or putting people forward for internal recognition and reward. It's really important that we're celebrating success at every turn. Believe me when I say it's very hard to over-celebrate good performance. And work with HR teams to make reward strategy a point of focus for the upcoming year. It's really important that we're adapting our reward strategies to the changing dynamic of the workforce around us. The 8th point that I'd like to mention is to communicate. We all know the old adage that communication is 65% how you look 25% how you sound, and only 10% what you actually say. Now, whether those figures are empirically accurate or not, video interviews and HR meetings will inevitably have impacted how we are all communicating, whether we recognise it or not. So some simple things you can think about are to seek confirmation and agreement regularly to make sure everyone's on the same page. To reiterate things you've discussed by email or in a shared document so everyone has access to the record. To be conscious of the increased impact that different accents can have on communication. Remember that different cultures have different styles of communication. A Hungarian friend of mine says he's frequently misinterpreted on video calls as being angry or intolerant, when actually that's just his natural communication style, and he's both confident and dismayed that if they were all in the room together, people wouldn't be reacting in the same way as they do when they hear his voice just through their headphones. And we have to make allowances for the less confident in our teams. Constantly being on video calls can be an unnerving and unpleasant experience, and we should be mindful of that. The 9th point that I'd like to mention is the importance of never stopping learning. No company's response to the pandemic has been perfect, regardless of what they put on their social media and professional networking accounts. So we mustn't be afraid to recognise our mistakes and learn from them. If your data team doesn't typically collaborate as much with other departments as you would like, use this as the opportunity to break the mould. Share what's gone well and what hasn't with other managers, with your peer group. If there's a value add from your data team specifically that can help the company better understand and adjust their overall approach to responding to this COVID pandemic, look for ways to distribute all of that knowledge across the company. Now, more than ever, every team in a company needs to make themselves essential. And the last on this list of 10 points that I'd like to mention is to remember that the only constant is change. A chunk of this presentation changed within the last 24-hour period because of the noises coming out of number 10 that the landscape in the country is changing again. So the simplest and most important piece of advice I can give is to be agile. With regional lockdowns and further national lockdowns, nobody knows what the future holds. Life is uncertain. Therefore, we should get comfortable as leaders with ambiguity and make sure we're encouraging that mindset in our teams as well. I appreciate your attention and you spending some of your time here at the virtual Big Data London event in an Eden Smith Executive Lounge. Hopefully you found this information a useful reminder of some of the stuff I'm sure you know already. If you'd like to discuss further how Eden Smith can continue to support your business throughout this challenging but exciting time, get in touch with jez.clark or matt.smith or nicholas.devenny at edensmith.co.uk. I'm also online right now in case there's any immediate questions you have. Enjoy the rest of the conference.